Alright, YouTube, I thought it'd be good to talk a little bit about sex education for those who maybe haven't studied the actual topic. It's a topic of interest, though, because it shows a very large discrepancy between states which teach abstinence only and states which either take a balanced approach. They'll teach abstinence or cover the material, but they'll also teach about contraception. And then states which have no particular mandate, it's more, local. Now, in my home state, abstinence is covered as a topic during sex education. It takes place in middle and high school. However, the primary focus is on contraception, and I know that's the same way for a handful of states. There are a lot of states in this country that teach abstinence-only sex education as the one and only sex education that they give to people. They literally won't even cover the topic of condoms. So I'd like to give you a few statistics, and you can judge for yourself. And then in the description of the video, there's some statistics, some links to different studies and so forth, which cover the topic pretty well. I know the people who support abstinence-only sex education, they claim it's this great golden idea that prevents all of these pregnancies and that teaching about contraception is just going to cause teens to have more sex. However, if you look at the actual studies, you'll find their claims don't have a leg to stand on. That literally abstinence-only sex education has been a complete and utter failure, and that teaching about contraception is responsible for the drop in teen pregnancies since the 90s. It's dropped quite drastically. That's as a result of the inclusion of contraception in most of the states, at least to some slight degree. So I'd like to give you a few things here. The first link, of course, is to a study from 2007. It was a federal report showing that abstinence-only sex education had little or no impact on teen pregnancies. Literally, the study showed it really doesn't change the pregnancy rate. The pregnancy rate in some states remained roughly the same as it has since the 90s, when sex education became more routine in those states. There's also a Washington Post article. Researchers found that teens who received comprehensive sex education were 60% less likely to get pregnant or to get someone pregnant than those who received no sex education. There are still states where some classes aren't receiving any sex education at all. Of course, if it's abstinence only, it really doesn't make a difference anyway. I would note, and on the third link, you have to go to page 13 of the article to get to the actual numbers. The rest of it's all random statistics, because it's a comprehensive study. Of note, New Hampshire, 50th in teen pregnancies. That's the lowest state. Vermont, 49th. Minnesota, 47th. North Dakota, 46th. And Iowa, 41st. What do all 5 of these states have in common? They may cover the topic of abstinence-only sex education, but they focus on contraception. I was raised here in Vermont. I remember sex ed. It was predominantly about the use of condoms, pills, all these alternate methods. The sex educational component that dealt with abstinence was done by an outside group which everyone predominantly laughed at. We thought it was funny, to tell the truth. Most of the people in the class found it hilarious. The things we did in sex ed were predominantly use a fucking condom so you don't get a fucking disease or someone pregnant. It's fairly straightforward. You see, here's the problem. Teens always have had sex. Teens always will have sex. I had sex when I was a teen. Most of you probably have had sex too, and probably had sex when you were a teen. I think the numbers are drastically higher than detailed by studies, simply because individuals who are 15, 16, they might not properly report that they've had sex because of the social stigma attached to premarital sex by Christians. So I think it's vastly underreported. I'd put it 10-20% higher than it actually is. So it's probably above half. By the age of 19, certainly, most people have had sex in this country. Despite that fact, the vast majority of these sexual encounters don't result in a pregnancy. Why? Because people are finally using contraception. Studies all around the world have shown if you use contraceptive methods, especially if you're using a condom, there's a much drastically decreased likelihood of getting a disease. There's a drastically decreased likelihood of getting pregnant. There was literally some bitch, abstinence-only fundamentalist nut on Fox News today talking about how 1/3 of condoms fail. I'm sorry, I haven't seen the report for that. It's just not true. Let's look at some of the worst states for teen pregnancies. New Mexico, number 1. Nevada, number 2. Arizona, number 3. Mississippi, number 5. Arkansas, number 7. Georgia, number 8. South Carolina, 10. Florida, 12. North Carolina, 14th. What do all of these shitty states have in common? They all teach abstinence as the primary means of reducing teen pregnancy and STDs. Here's the problem with abstinence only. It's a good idea on paper. Simply don't have sex, you won't get pregnant, you won't get an STD. It makes sense, right? It makes perfect sense. There's a problem. By the age of 15 or 16, most people are sexually desirous. They want to have sex because it's fun. Because everybody on Earth practically has sex. It's an enjoyable activity, it relieves stress, it feels good. It's intimate with your partner or partners. It's a wonderful thing to do. Sex is great. Sex is the reason every living being on Earth is here. Sex created you. It's meant to be fun, otherwise people wouldn't do it and the species would die out. So here's the problem. Teaching abstinence-only sex education addresses the idea that you should somehow be able to suppress a completely natural sexual drive just based on a Judeo-Christian notion that, yes, you should wait till marriage because it's of Jesus Christ. The fact is that that antiquated idea does not work. People always have, always will, have premarital sex. Most people will. It's not a big deal. It's not some terrible act that's going to cause Jehovah's hand to come out of the sky and swat you like a fly. It's just not going to happen. It happens to most people when they're in their teens at least once. So, the idea of teaching abstinence only simply doesn't work. It's much better to tell these teens you should use protection. Number 1, you should use protection. Number 2, it would be nice if you would at least, know the person on a rudimentary basis and be in an established relationship with them rather than having one-night stands all the time. That's a lot more risky than simply, well, we've been dating for 2 years and we really want to do it, but we're trying to wait till marriage. You know what? If you take that lineup, that, oh, we're waiting till marriage, eventually you're going to find yourself in a situation, more than likely, where you're going to have sex. If you haven't planned it out ahead of time, you probably won't have a condom on hand when you do. That's the problem. You should carry around a condom. If you're a horny person and you're sexually active or potentially sexually active, carry a friggin' condom around. And if you want to fuck your girlfriend, but put a condom on. It's not really that hard. And people will say, well, condoms don't feel as good. Well, you know what? It feels even worse to have your girlfriend get pregnant, and then either she aborts and you potentially, lose the relationship because she's depressed all the time and you can't stand it, or she decides to have it and you end up either, being a father at 17 or you have to pay child support for the rest of your life. If people make smart decisions, they can have all the sex they want and be relatively safe in doing so. The condom failure rate is not 33%. Like some people will try to argue. The condom failure rate, I've used condoms before. I've never had a condom fail. That's a lot of condoms. Just saying. Abstinence-only sex education simply doesn't work. Look at the best states for teen pregnancies and look at the worst states. You will find a unifying feature that almost all of the states that are doing well on teen pregnancies, that are well below the national average, almost all of them teach contraception as the primary modus of their sex educational campaign. They may cover abstinence only, but it's an afterthought. If you look at all of the worst states, they use contraception as an afterthought or don't mention it at all. Some of these states literally have written into their sex educational codes, they are not to mention the use of condoms. That is how superstitious and backwards these people truly are. They do not understand. If you simply put a little rubber thing on your wee-wee before you have sex, you're probably not going to have a problem. But they don't understand that. And the reason is simple. They're trying to legislate. It's really theocratic when you think about it. They're trying to legislate a health campaign based on the Bible. The Bible is thousands of years old. It's a collection of texts from the Bronze and Iron Age. They did not understand contraception in those times. Back then, contraception was smearing honey in the vagina, or as one Greek physician once noted, jump backwards or sneeze after having sex. That was what they considered contraception. It didn't really work that well. At least they had a notion in their mind about what to do, but it didn't really work. Now we have all of these wonderful things. We have the birth control pill. We have the shot. We have the patch. We have condoms. All sorts of condoms. Ultra thin and, studded for her pleasure, ringed for his pleasure, whatever. We've got all of these different things that do work to reduce pregnancy. They would not be marketed if they didn't work. If all the contraceptive methods are as terrible at working as the fundamentalist abstinence-only people claim, there'd be a hell of a lot more pregnancies in this country. The fact is that in developed parts of the country that have the best educational campaigns on sex ed, there aren't a lot of teen pregnancies. Here, case in point, I've been to Texas and I've been to Florida, two states which focus predominantly on abstinence. And I've lived in Vermont, which focuses predominantly on contraception. When I was in high school, there was one person who was pregnant in my high school class before graduation. Of course, there could have been others that were, and of course, aborted. There was one person known who actually got pregnant. When I was down in Texas or Florida, I saw literally hundreds of high school students, because I was in the high schools down there as well. I wasn't in high school, but I knew people who were, and I'd go to the high schools, meet up or whatever. I saw hundreds of people down there pregnant. 9th graders, 10th grade. I saw middle schoolers who were pregnant. I never saw a pregnant middle schooler here in Vermont. I'm sure it happens from time to time, but at much lower rates. That's because they're teaching they're basically telling the teens, ignore all of your natural drives, and these condom things are just a tool by Satan to delude you into having premarital sex. Guess what? Most of them are having premarital sex. You cannot stop that fact. It will not stop, unless you want to resort to a fascist state where you have, a hidden camera in the pants of every teenager. It's just not going to happen. So you need to teach them about contraception. If you want to cover abstinence, cover abstinence. It's certainly not going to hurt anybody if you want to talk about it, because, abstinence is a perfectly effective birth control method. The problem is, most people aren't going to be able to suppress that drive. By the age of 15 or 16, the vast majority of people are sexually active. There are people who are 12 or 13 who are sexually active, some of whom have already gone through menstruation and can get pregnant. Think about that for a moment before you doom contraception, because you know what? You're only doing a disservice to your state. Up here, 49th in teen pregnancies. Our partner, New Hampshire, basically the same thing as Vermont, only with a few extra people and a little piece of beach on one side. 50th. Maine is 48th. The three northern New England states are all the three lowest states. And Maine is the only one that even really seriously covers abstinence only. But Vermont and New Hampshire are better because we don't, just an aside, we think people from Maine are a little bit weird with their lobsters and stuff. They're kind of creepy. No offense to any of my subscribers from Maine. So that's about all I have to say about it. Abstinence only clearly doesn't work. You can look at the statistics yourself. They're right in the description. It simply doesn't work. Contraception does. And expecting horny teenagers not to have sex is the worst idea in the long, sad history of bad ideas. It's just not going to happen. I know from experience.